Is Antonio Gibson the salary relief that your lineup needs? Is home field advantage a thing of the past with no fans in the stands? And is it Djax week? We will find out on the week one edition of the Footballguys Daily Fantasy Power Grid presented by DraftKings. It feels good to be back. There's football in the air, and we have a new analyst on the show this year. We've got Phil Alexander. We'd like to welcome Phil to the show. He's been on the show as sort of a fill-in analyst before. Phil, welcome. Thank you for joining us this year on the Power Grid.
Appreciate you guys having me. And let me be the first to pour one out for Ryan Hester. I'm a huge fan of the show. It's an appointment listening for me every week, and I'm going to miss Ryan's takes. But very happy that you guys asked me, and hopefully I could help the crowd win some coin this year.
The bar was set really low, so all you have to do is just a little bit.
Poor guy's not even here.
We miss Ryan Hester, and he had, too much on his plate, so he decided to scale back, but we're hoping to get him back on the show for some fill-ins this year so that Devin can harass him some more. Let's do what we always do at the start of the Power Grid. It wouldn't be the Power Grid if we didn't kick it to John Lee to talk about those Vegas lines. I'm just glad we have some Vegas lines to talk about. John, tell us, what is Vegas telling you?
Yeah, we got Vegas lines, and week one is always really interesting because I think typically we don't always know what's going to happen. I would say this year, maybe more so than ever, we didn't have a single preseason game. It's going to be interesting to see how close Vegas gets it. Home field advantage, as you led with, may be a thing of the past in the sense that you won't have 60,000 fans kind of, throttling the opposing offense. We're going to talk a little bit about that today. But in terms of like team totals and games you need to be watching, top of the list, Baltimore Ravens going up against Devin's Cleveland Browns. They got a team total of over 28 points. It's the highest on the main slate. San Francisco and New Orleans just trailing a little bit further down the line there. That New Orleans game is kind of interesting because we've got the ex-New England Patriots, Tom Brady and Gronk and company, adding Leonard Fournette as well. That game could be a shootout, and I think there's some game stacking potential therein. In terms of the other ends, who do we want to look at potentially for defenses? And maybe we could look at New England and Buffalo in that AFC East conference going up against Miami and the Jets. We'll talk about that near the end of the show. But happy to be back. This is great.
Does New England have anyone left on their defense?
They may not, but they're going up against Miami, so that may be all we need to go against.
Yeah, exactly. If you're new to the show, usually what we do is we go position by position, and then we talk about stacks at the end of the show. So stick with us to find out who we are combining for GPPs. Devin, we're going to go to quarterbacks first. I want to hear who you think is the chalk this week. Who's your cash game play? Who's someone you're looking at in GPPs? Tell us about quarterbacks.
Lamar Jackson, and Lamar Jackson. Right. I mean, for this week, I think it's pretty easy. I mean, the Browns, I don't know what their plan is on defense this year because they let Joe Schobert and Christian Kirksey go. They were relying on Mac Wilson and Sion Takitaki on the outside. And the problem is both of those, I think they were 4th and 5th round rookies last year, struggled. To make matters worse, Mac Wilson will miss this game, leaving the Browns with Jacob Phillips, who's a rookie on the weak side. That's a lot of running for Lamar Jackson. It's a week where he's by far my favorite play. I don't think it's even close. He's expensive, $8,100 on DraftKings, but to me, I think he has a 100-yard upside and a touchdown or two, depending on how close the game stays. But this is a defense that if he gets past the defensive line, Grant Delpit, who is their starting safety that they drafted in the late first, early second round, is out with a torn Achilles as well. So this is a defense that's not set up to stop the run. It's set up to stop the pass. And I think Lamar Jackson's in for a big day. Conversely, I mean, going down pretty cheap, and I'll get to one very deep sleeper later, but Carson Wentz, I think, is in a pretty good spot. He's been a little banged up this preseason, but when isn't Carson Wentz banged up? going up against Washington, who I think we all knew last year was a pretty horrendous defense. They actually lost Quentin Dunbar in the offseason, who is by far their best corner, and brought back Kendall Fuller from the Chiefs, who struggled last year. So I think that this is a defense that is going to struggle out of the gate. They have some new pieces shifting around in Washington, new coaching staff, et cetera. So I think that this is a week where Carson Wentz should be a solid GPP play as you look down the board to try and save some cash.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to say. Phil, I want to get your take on this. Lamar Jackson is just so pricey here.
Play him.
It seems so safe to go with him in cash because maybe there's salary relief at other positions, but he's also going to be really highly rostered, I would think. Phil, what's your take on quarterback?
Well, I'm never going to argue with anyone for rostering Lamar Jackson. It's a good plan. The lineups that I've been making, and you do get to stack him with his number one receiver if you're looking at tournaments. Mark Andrews is 6K, so overall the stack isn't too outrageously priced, and so I think you could definitely get away with playing Jackson in tournaments. I've got my eye on Jimmy Garoppolo in GPPs. Last year, he went over 30 in both games versus the Cardinals. These two teams match up really well with each other. They could go back and forth. The Cardinals got better on offense. I think they'll be able to give San Francisco a bit more of a challenge. And the nice thing about Garoppolo, especially for tournaments, is that sort of just like Lamar Jackson, you know exactly who to stack him with. There's a lot of uncertainty at wide receiver with the 49ers. Is Deebo Samuel going to play? Is Brandon Ayuk healthy? There's a bunch of slot guys, Trent Taylor, Fuller, but that he's going to Kittle, especially against that Arizona defense. And he's super affordable. So he's my favorite, one of my favorite plays. The 49ers have that, they're over 27 for their implied total. So for him to be low rostered, which I think he is, I think it's a really strong play in GPPs.
Remember how I said there's a bar that was really low that you had to exceed it?
I just limboed it.
You're not really exceeding it.
Ignore Devin. John, what do you think?
There's a couple things here. So I'm going to circle back and make sure that we're level setting. So typically, starting week one, we need to recalibrate. So I've heard a couple things here. Devin, Lamar Jackson is a cash game play, correct? That's where you were going with that, and or a GPP, but it's very easy cash game.
I think he's a must play in cash, and I think that he's in consideration for GPPs. Okay. He's going to be highly owned, but
so I think that's fair. But I want to come back to you before I provide any of my own opinions or insight. He's $8,100, and if you want CMC, Christian McCaffrey at 10K, you basically wiped out over a third of your salary on a week where surprisingly, for the first time in as long as I can remember in DFS, there aren't a whole lot of savings. I mean,
yeah.
Well, there weren't those preseason injuries that were sort of rocking depth charts along the way.
Yeah, it looks like
John
lost John, but
he's holding really still. You go, Devin.
There he is. They look
back.
Like? Oh, did I?
You're
I
back.
was talking.
Yeah.
Basically, I asked.
I'll throw in there too that
You go, John.
Okay. Boy, we're having a rough time. Week one,
we're in preseason form. You go for it, John.
Devin, all I was asking is at 10,000 for CMC and 8,100, you're looking at a 30-year salary. What do your cash game rosters look like? Are you comfortable with them going that high at quarterback at a position where typically I like to try to save salary because I think that there's a lot more room for error because every quarterback's going to touch the ball 30 to 35 times in a game.
Yeah, we'll get into running backs in a minute, but Antonio Gibson helps. I think there's Mark Ingram down there. There's some guys that are cheaper. One of the Jacksonville running backs maybe, but we can talk about that in the running back section. But I think there's some sneaky values, but you're right. There's not a lot of value out there. And at the wide receiver, I don't love anything at the top. So I like some of these 4 to 5K guys.
Okay, so with that in mind, and I wanted to make sure. So the other end of it was Phil. It sounded like you were GPP centric when you gave your take. Was there a cash game quarterback that you were describing? I know you're a GPP player, but it's important for our people to know that.
Yeah, so that would be a good point to mention that I write the weekly DraftKings GPP article, and my brain kind of lacks the bandwidth to strategize for two different types of games each week. So most of my analysis is going to be GPP centric, and I'll try to preface it with that going forward. Great. I don't hate Garoppolo, by the way, at his price in cash games, though. I think he could deliver.
All right, so that exactly dovetails with what I'm about to say, and that's Phil. I think my favorite cash game quarterback this week is Jimmy Garoppolo against Arizona. I am not afraid of their defense by all means, and I think that Arizona this year they're running. We have our first red
there it is.
Joe of the year. Yes, and I'm glad I was the one talking.
I'm glad that it wasn't like a fancy printout.
God forbid we look professional around here.
So Devin flashed the red black eye Joe on John's cash game play of Garoppolo.
Let me finish my thought on Jimmy Garoppolo being a cash game selection, and then I'll defer to Devin to tell me why I'm wrong, and then we'll wait until next week, and I can talk about why I was right. Look, Arizona's running super fast. Kingsbury has really implemented this high-speed offense. We've read about it all spring. They're practicing super fast. I think what we're going to see in this game is a lot of plays. I actually think it's very game stack-worthy for GPPs. But Garoppolo's only 5,800. I recognize he's missing a couple key receivers, but he doesn't need to do a whole lot to pay off value on 5,800. And he's got George Kittle. And I think that's going to be enough with him this week. And I want to save salary because I'm not so sure about the other positions where I'm going to be able to save salary and feel comfortable for cash games. Go ahead, Devin.
Yeah, I'd rather have Phillip Rivers for 200 more. Garoppolo's floors, he has too many games under 200 yards passing for me to trust him in cash. I'd even prefer Minshew against the Colts in that game.
And that's what I was going to ask. Is there some other low-priced guy like Minshew or Joe Burrow or somebody like that you might throw into GPPs?
Well, if you hate for cash, if you hate Garoppolo for reasons that Devin's described, I'm going to go up another $300 and go to Cam Newton, New England's. There's some questions about what's going on in the backfield there. I just think that Cam Newton, we've forgotten about him. We're overlooking him. I still believe that he's got what it takes to deliver at this level. 6,100, I don't hate him, especially
playing at home against Miami.
Right, and his price is cheap enough that he doesn't need to do a whole lot to deliver 3x value, which is typically what we're expecting in cash games on DraftKings. I think for GPPs though, it's wide open. Week one, you can go just about any direction and kind of justify. And we've heard a few of the guys talk about what they're looking at. I love looking at that New Orleans Tampa Bay game this week with Drew Brees and Tom Brady, two future Hall of Famers going at one another with renewed weapons. I think the Saints are definitely Super Bowl contenders, at least in the preseason. And it's going to be a lot of fun to watch what Tampa Bay does out there with all the signings that they've had and so forth. But a lot of different ways to go at quarterback positions this week. And I have a few other GPP guys on my list, but I'll stop and hand it back to
Russell Wilson's going to be super popular. I think that going up against Atlanta, who lost Desmond Trufant, and they were a pretty poor defense last year against the pass, I just don't see it. I mean, he could have a big game, certainly possible, but I'm either going up or going down. And then the less than 1% own guy that I teased earlier on in the show is Mitchell Trubisky going up against Detroit. He threw for 6 touchdowns in their 2 games last year. He's down at 5,300. He basically has 3 or 4 weeks to try and win a job, or they're going to Nick Foles. And less than 1% owned. He wasn't healthy all last year. Maybe we get some of 2018 Trubisky back.
Who do we see there in terms of because they've got a running back who's injured. We'll talk about that in just a bit. Allen Robinson likely is shadowed by Darius Slay. You may or may not consider that to be a daunting matchup.
Slay's on the Eagles.
Sorry. We're in preseason form here. Who are we looking? Who are we looking for?
Desmond Trufant's probably going to shadow Robinson. Jeff Okudah is hurt, which should open up opportunities for Anthony Miller. And then if Montgomery's out, I see them going with a pass-heavy approach with a lot of Tariq Cohen.
Yeah, I think Tariq Cohen's a beneficiary here.
What do you think of Jimmy Graham's role? We'll talk about that in a bit, but maybe
he's older than you are.
Whoa, that's very old. All right, let's. Any other thoughts on quarterbacks before we move on to running backs?
Yeah, I'll throw one more out there for GPP since you asked. And if I'm looking at an under 1% guy, under 6K, I like Derek Carr better than Trubisky. And I could hear Devin now, his rebuttal to this one coming, but I think Josh Jacobs is going to be – we're going to get to running backs in a second, but I think Josh Jacobs is going to be a really popular play. And I think that the Raiders' passing game is the clear leverage on Josh Jacobs. The point total for – I almost called them Oakland. That's going to happen many times this year. The Vegas total for Vegas is 25.5 points, which puts 4 touchdowns in play. And I think a big reveal early in the season that we're going to get is that Carolina has the absolute worst defense in the league against the run and otherwise. So if all those points come via the pass, I like the idea of stacking up like Derek Carr, Henry Ruggs, and Darren Waller and seeing what happens.
Good luck.
We've thrown a lot of different options at you, listeners, viewers. Tell us down in the YouTube comments which of these low-priced quarterbacks you would feel safe playing in a cash game, if any. And we would love to chat with you in the comments down below.
Give us a thumbs up or thumbs down. I don't care which.
Give a thumbs down for Devin and a thumbs up for the rest of us. Let's talk about running backs. We mentioned Christian McCaffrey. Obviously he's a big part of the conversation when we talk about running backs. John also mentioned the David Montgomery injury there for Chicago. And then on the other side of that game, there's DeAndre Swift is kind of iffy for this game. So running backs. Let's
just
go
real quick. Antonio Gibson must play. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, he's basically min price on both sites. It's kind of hard not to put that in as your free bingo square this week.
And he's going to be somewhere 40-45% owned for GPPs.
And that's the question. What do you do with him in GPPs?
If he's going to be that high, I'm fading him.
And that's what I'm thinking.
Yeah. I mean, he's never played an NFL snap, right? How do you put him in at that level of ownership?
But if he has 5 catches, he hits value.
Yeah, I mean,
he's guaranteed to hit value. I mean, he's as close to guaranteed as any player on this slate to hit value.
Nothing's guaranteed in DFS.
I get it. But you're hoping an injury or some fumble or you're hoping for, I don't know. I'm playing him.
We know who his quarterback is.
Yeah, fair.
Yeah.
I think his median projection on a PPR site kind of starts him off at 3X. So for cash games, I kind of think you got to do it, especially because there's not a ton of value. He is min price on DraftKings, but they raised the salary floor for running backs up by $1,000, and I think that's why we're feeling a little bit different in this week one than we're used to in terms of being able to to put together like an all-star lineup.
Gotcha. They may have done that specifically for week one because they released the prices so far in advance. John, who are you playing at running back? I think we seem to have a unanimous agreement that Gibson is a cash game play. Who else? You said CMC as well. So is that your pair of running backs?
If you can afford it, and I think it really depends on the decisions you make at wide receiver, which obviously we'll get to in the next section. CMC's got to be in play. I mean, the guy is basically the focal point of that offense. He is $10,000. It's going to cost you 20% of your entire salary cap at DraftKings. But if I can get him in, I'm going to do it as long as the opportunity cost is not too high. I built a few preliminary lineups, and I think I can do it. It depends on what you're going to do at wide receiver and tight end. And again, we'll talk about those. I think in that same game, we've already talked about it with Phil. Josh Jacobs is really interesting. It's 6,800. It looks like he's kind of in our preliminary projections of Football Guys. He's around 3X. He looks like one of the guys that you almost have to have. You hope for a ground-heavy game there in Carolina, I believe. Those are the guys I'm looking at. It's those three for cash games. For GPPs, I'll talk about those maybe after letting the other guys fill in the blanks. But it's those three guys for cash games.
Speaking of filling in the blanks, Phil, who do you have at running back?
All right, so I'll start off. I don't know if I have him at running back, but I do think he's a really important player within the context of this slate. The health of Miles Sanders' hamstring, I think, is going to be really important. If we see that he's practicing in full all week, I think at 6,300, he definitely warrants consideration in cash games and in GPPs. As it is, you're kind of taking a risk that, this guy who had a soft tissue injury is fully healed and ready for a full workload. So I think you have to take a big wait and see on what happens with him, and that's going to impact, I think, the common roster construction on the slate.
All signs are pointing to him being fine, though, with them only keeping 3 running backs. They cut Holyfield and a bunch of other no-name guys, but they kept only Clement and Boston Scott, I believe.
Yeah, definitely trending in the right direction. So, as long as we see him a full go all week, I'm on board with Sanders as a play in a game that Philadelphia should win handily, as long as their offensive line isn't too much of an issue. Outside of that, John mentioned Jacobs, who's in a great spot. I mean, Carolina was 31st against the run last year, and Luke Kuechly, the captain of their defense and the best linebacker on the team, retired early. So they're going to be a complete mess on the ground. All for that call. For GPPs, I'll throw one out. Dalvin Cook, I think, is going to go overlooked in the top salary tier. And I think it has something to do with the redraft hesitation on him and his holdout, but it doesn't appear that that's going to be a concern. So he's playing in week 1. He's significantly less expensive than CMC. And what's our last memory of Green Bay's run defense? It was the NFC Championship game, and Raheem Mostert bulldozed them for 220 yards and 4 touchdowns. And they did nothing somehow in the offseason to address it. They go out and draft a running back and a quarterback in the first 2 rounds instead of shoring up that defensive front. Dalvin Cook is in a spot where he could be like sub 10% owned and turn out to be the running back 1 on the slate. So I really like that in GPPs. And I'll just throw out one more quick one. I'm intrigued by Jonathan Taylor. I don't know how much I'm going to have yet, but I'm definitely intrigued. I've been drawing this corollary all offseason of, Marlon Mack is to Chester Taylor as Jonathan Taylor is to Adrian Peterson as a rookie. If that might date me, but
I'm feeling you. I hear you. I gotcha.
In that first game with AP, he ran for 160 yards and a touchdown, and the rest is history. And just given that game where Indy should win big, they're set up to run, they have the road graders on the offensive line. If the game gets out of hand and they say, all right, let's see what the rookie could do, he could definitely swing tournaments.
John, you held up the red black-eyed Joe for Jonathan Taylor. Do you want to add anything there?
Yeah, I mean, I think my issue with Jonathan Taylor is we just don't know what's going to happen yet. We haven't had a whole lot of preseason. Obviously, we haven't had any preseason. And it's difficult to know what's going to happen with Marlon Mack. And I'm not prepared to pay $5,000 for a running back that has never touched a ball in the NFL. And you know what? This is actually something worth talking about as a crew because I was looking at this earlier. typically what we do with running backs is we try to find teams where they are you have a running back who's favored by a touchdown or more, right? Because they're going to be running out the clock at the back end of the game. And this week, looking at those teams, Baltimore questions at running back, and you got a quarterback who steals a lot of goals.
Well, there's questions there.
Say again?
I don't know if there's questions there.
Well, I heard you say Mark Ingram. I'm going to give you a chance to talk about Mark Ingram in a second, but I'm not so sure. I mean, J.K. Dobbins, we'll figure that out. But let me just make this point first. San Francisco, Raheem Mostert and Tevin Coleman, kind of splitting things there. Indianapolis, we just talked about. New England, a lot of questions there. Damian Harris is apparently going to miss a couple weeks. And in the last one, Buffalo, we've got a rookie there, Zach, what the hell's his name? Moss, with Devin Singletary. I think there's a lot of questions in these games where we have heavy favorites for the first time, and it's going to be an interesting week in terms of how you address these situations. And for me, for the most part, I'm avoiding the running games in those particular matchups for the reasons I mentioned. Go ahead, Dev.
Devin,
yeah.
This.
So Mark Ingram I really like, mostly because J.K. Dobbins was listed as 4th on the depth chart, which to me is more significant than we may think it is. If they ease him in, like I talked about the running back situation in Cleveland, I think Ingram could go under-owned because of people fearful of J.K. Dobbins. So right now we have Mark Ingram at 2% owned, which if that's the case and Dobbins actually is 4th in the depth chart, you're going to have a guy running against a linebacking group that has really struggled. So for me, I think that at 2%, he's a pretty good leverage play in GPPs if he stays down that low. We haven't seen what the numbers are going to do once with the reactions earlier today from the 4th on the depth chart thing.
So I don't know how true this is. I wouldn't stop you, but I don't know how true it is. But I read it earlier at several places on Twitter that Baltimore always places their rookies lowest on the depth chart. And if that's the case, then it doesn't mean anything. So
fair. So I guess it's a wait and see.
Yeah. So to the people who are listening and watching, make sure you double check that as we go to the end of the week, because we are, and we should have said this earlier, we're recording this a lot earlier in the week than we typically do. And so we don't have as much information on a Monday night as we typically do on a Thursday night.
Yep. Devin, tell us about some other running backs you like. So
yeah.
Maybe Mark Ingram. Who else?
Yeah. Christian McCaffrey for me in GPP is a hard pass. If I look at the new coaching staff, new quarterback, he's going to be 35% plus owned. I think a lot of people are just going to slot him in thinking that he's going to do exactly what he did last year. And I don't know that that's the case. I mean, we look at Alvin Kamara with Teddy Bridgewater, and he had some games where he just flat out struggled, 2 or 3 targets in the entire game. So for me, do I think that that's going to happen? No, but I think there's a non-zero chance that it takes this offense a little bit of time to get going a little bit. So for me, it's a hard pass for McCaffrey. I do like Jacobs. Miles Sanders, I think is going to be popular, but I do like him. One guy that I think is maybe overlooked a little bit is Austin Eckler against Cincinnati. So we've talked about Cincinnati seemingly the last, 5 years since we've been doing this show, that their run defense is horrible. They finished bottom 10 last year against the run and allowed 5 receptions for 50 yards or so per game. So I think that this is Eckler's offense until someone else. I mean, there's a little bit of buzz about Josh Kelly, but I don't really see it immediately. I think that this is Eckler's team. And Tyrod Taylor, they're going to try and keep him limited in what he actually does. He's not going to run nearly as much as the Tyrod Taylor that we saw in Buffalo. He's, 33 years old or so. So I think that it's a situation in which Eckler could go a little bit under-owned. And then I'm looking at Jacksonville. So whether it's Divine Ozigbo or who's the other guy, James Robinson at minimum price. Robinson's listed as the head of Ozigbo right now, but if you're looking just to build a stars and scrubs team, take a shot on one of these guys and hope that they pay off at minimum price.
Yeah, specifically a GPP dart kind of a choice, right?
Realistically, if we get clarity, I could see one of these guys becoming a cash game play.
Depending on how much clarity we get in terms
at min price. I mean, why not, right?
Yeah. Phil, you seem to not like the Jacksonville backfield.
I think you nailed it, that it depends on what type of clarity we get, because I would say that odds on it's going to be a 50-50 split with those guys. And it's such a bad setup for running backs. I just see them getting completely trounced by Indianapolis, who I actually think is like a sleeper Super Bowl favorite this year. They're a team that I could picture going really far. And I just think that the Jaguars are going to get their doors blown off. And I don't know, maybe that means
doesn't that help them?
Maybe that means a bunch of dump offs like Fournette got last year when Minshew saw pressure. So I just think they're going to share is all.
Yeah.
You didn't mention the player who I think benefits most there, and that's Chris Thompson. We don't think that Chris Thompson's going to be the third down back.
I just haven't heard a lot of buzz, but it's possible.
Yeah. I mean, the fact that we're all debating this tells you that maybe it's a stay away situation, right?
That's what I was thinking. Yeah.
It's a stay away, or you take a couple chances. Depending on how many lineups you're building, you may want to take a couple chances on a couple of these guys and see what happens, because if one of them pays off, it breaks the slate.
If you're playing Millionaire Maker, this is the type of thing that you should be thinking about. But if you're playing a 1,000 or 2,000 entry GPP, you really don't have to take these types of leaps.
Yeah. But it's a thing that could win the Millionaire Maker if one of these guys does emerge, especially if we don't have clarity. But if we have clarity, then it's going to be one of these guys could be a must play.
Yeah, we'll have to see how it goes later in the week. Let's talk about some wide receivers. Make sure that you please subscribe to our channel. That way you get all of the great shows that come out, including the Audible and On the Couch. And if you're into Dynasty football, we've got a Dynasty show that's new this year. Check all that out. Please hit the bell so you get little notifications when we post new content. Let's talk about wide receivers. There's a couple of guys we're watching. Like we said, there's a couple of San Francisco receivers that are banged up. And I don't know if it has a strong impact, but Mike Williams, it looks like he is not going to go this week. So that could impact some of those targets for Austin Eckler, like we were talking about maybe. I mean, they're very different players, but there's more to go around with one of their guys out. Devin, let's go right back to you and talk wide receivers. Who do you like this week?
DeSean Jackson.
It's D-Jax. D-Jax.
I will have him in every lineup, and he'll be the first name that I click on it. I posted on Twitter on August 27th, and I'll repost it here this week. But week one in his history averages 98 yards and about 0.6 touchdowns per game. Against former teams, he also has 98 yards and 0.6 touchdowns per game. So he's almost the identical player. You merge those two, and you get a guy who at 4,900 I am all in on. Alshon Jeffrey's out. Who else are they going to throw to besides the tight ends? So this is the healthiest D-Jax that you will have because there's no preseason games going up against a former team. Last year he had 152 yards and 2 touchdowns against Washington. I think he's a must-play this week.
That's a bold statement for a guy who's usually pretty boom or bust. I can see that look on John's face, like, good luck with that.
Yeah. I mean, for what it's worth, if you're saving salary for cash games, I don't hate it, but I don't love it. He's on my list of cash game players if I need to go that low. I'm trying to avoid him because he's a boom bust guy, like you point out, Austin. For GPPs, though, I love it. I love, if you want to go the Carson Wentz, D-Jax, Miles Sanders to get like that kind of core of the Eagles offense, hope they go off, and then maybe run it back with Terry McLaurin, who last year, he tore this team up. I think the only team he had 120 yards against both games was the Philadelphia Eagles. So that makes a lot of sense from a GPP perspective. But
I think Jackson will end up the highest owned wide receiver this week.
The highest roster percentage? Oh, in like mid-sized GPPs?
In all GPPs.
Wow.
I just don't think that there's a lot of ways to save money, and people are going to start believing the stats that are thrown out there as multiple sources are already starting to report it.
Okay. I think we spent enough time on D-Jax.
John is speechless.
Yeah.
I'm thinking whether or not I want to vehemently disagree with that, but I think I'll save it. We have 16 more weeks to go. I don't need to disagree with you on every take, but let's just say that I don't think Djax is going to be the highest owned receiver in GPPs.
Phil, tell me about some receivers you like for GPPs, being the GPP guy.
Sure. Henry Ruggs. So I mentioned Derek Carr. And Henry Ruggs is the type of guy that you want exposure to in GPPs every single week, regardless of matchup. He runs a sub 4.3. He's explosive. They drafted him early. They're going to manufacture touches. And everybody's on Josh Jacobs.
Devin hates this take. Like he's ready to explode.
I could see the gears turning over there.
Derek Carr can't throw the ball 15 yards down the field.
He doesn't need to. And
Brian Edwards is the guy.
He doesn't need to, and that's my point. They're going to get him touches close to the line of scrimmage, and when they do, he is going to blow past Carolina Panthers on his way to the end zone for long touchdowns.
No,
it's happening. For all the reasons that Josh Jacobs is a chalk play, Henry Ruggs should also be a chalk play because they're going to scheme him the ball in space, and he is going to run past these guys.
Do we trust the coaching staff in Oakland to be able to do exactly what you're saying? Because
there's no team in Oakland. We're not going to trust any coaching staff in Oakland.
Look at my face.
In Vegas, we will.
My face is the same color as my shirt.
I was going to say, Phil picked up right where Ryan left off, making smoke come out of Devin's ears, and I love it. That's my favorite thing about this show.
Wow.
Who else you got, Phil?
Kenny Golladay. I think that he's going to be probably in the 5% range, and I think that this guy is one of the most dominant wide receivers in the league. And as a matter of fact, last time that he played the Bears, it was like 150-yard, one touchdown game with David Blau at quarterback. That's Devin's boy, Blau, by the way, right?
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. I just think that he's going to be one of those guys this year that with Stafford back, he's going to get like 25% of the team's targets. He's an end zone producer, and 6,200. One of the things that I did when pricing first came out was to compare the price rankings to redraft ADP, and he stood out as one of the biggest values in terms of, he's going high in redraft leagues, and his salary is like right in the middle in terms of wide receivers in week one. I think it has something to do with the matchup, but I wouldn't be concerned about it at all.
Devin, you mentioned earlier in the show that you're not enthralled with some of the receivers at the top end of the pricing scale. Can you tell me, is there anyone you like up there, or like why are you kind of down on him?
Well, you look at Julio Jones. He's playing Seattle. Don't really like that matchup. Devontae Adams has a tough matchup against Minnesota. Chris Godwin maybe Godwin, but there's only one ball to go around in Tampa Bay, and I think that both Godwin and Evans will probably draw Lattimore, but so maybe Godwin, but that's more of a deep shot. DeAndre Hopkins.
What's interesting about that, I'm going to pause for a second on the Tampa Bay guys, is that even internally at Football Guys, some of the guys who do rankings and not necessarily projections, we had to kind of say hey guys, everybody on Tampa Bay can't be ranked high. Someone's going to get the ball and someone else isn't. And I think you see that in a lot of people's rankings across the industry, is that all the Tampa Bay guys are too high. Somebody's not going to get fed there.
It's like Kansas City. You can't have 4 first-round picks.
Right, exactly.
They're not going to score 40 points a game. But anyway, maybe Michael Thomas would be the only one, but it's so hard to fit in your lineup. Michael Thomas is never a bad decision, but it's can you fit all the other guys that you like with Thomas? It's really hard. I think
plus you probably have Jackson and McCaffrey are probably the really expensive guys you're trying to squeeze into your lineup over Thomas.
For me, yeah. I mean, yeah. Thomas in a GPP I think is fine, especially if you want to deviate from going with McCaffrey. Mm-hmm. But let me get into some guys that I like just real quick. I think DK Metcalf will be one of the most popular guys this week, going up against that Atlanta secondary that I talked about. Big play potential. A lot of people just love the guy because of some of his long touchdown capabilities that he has. At 5,800 is firmly in play. I do like McLaurin. And then going way down, I think it's hard, right? So taking shots on like a guy like N'Keal Harry at 4,400 against Miami. We just don't know how the Patriots are going to move the ball, and he's a former first-round pick. So I don't know. I see that taking a shot on a guy like him, but it's really hard once you get under 5K. I mean, it's really difficult. There's not a lot of value as we go down the board, which is why some of those top-end guys are not necessarily as intriguing as they otherwise would be.
Yeah.
Oh, one last guy is Preston Williams for Miami. Before he was hurt last year, he was outpacing, or he's basically matching Devontae Parker, and having Fitzpatrick there helps that offense. So at 4,500, Preston Williams is definitely intriguing.
John, any other guys you want to circle back on before we move on to tight ends?
Yeah, excuse me. I'll do it quickly too. I don't think we covered cash games very well, so I'll say that I think Devontae Adams should be at the top of the list. If you can somehow get him into your lineup, you should. 7,300. If you need any rationale, just go back and look at his game logs last year, and then tell me who the wide receiver 2 or 3 is in Green Bay. It's not even close. It's a huge drop-off after Devontae Adams. I think Keenan Allen and Marquise Brown are both in play with regards to cash games. They're going to be 6,400, 5,100 respectively. They're key cogs in their offense. They should see plenty of targets. I like them both for cash games. In terms of GPPs, a couple of the guys folks have already said. I'll lay out Emmanuel Sanders. I think Emmanuel Sanders is really interesting for 2020. He's a guy I loved in best ball and season long. I'm going to like him a lot in DFS as well. This is the best quarterback he's had in well over 5 years. He's had guys like Trevor Siemian, Brock Osweiler, Paxton Lynch throwing to him for the past 5 years. I think that he really opens things up for that offense. And I think if he goes under owns this week, you should definitely take advantage. And GPP only, millionaire maker, Paris Campbell. I like him this week. 3,900. He's saving you some salary at Jacksonville. I don't think anybody's going to be on him. He'll be definitely less than 3% owned. So if you need to save some salary and you're filling out one of those lottery tickets, Paris Campbell's my guy.
We have him at 3.6 right now, but he could very well fall below that. One FanDuel specific guy, Anthony Miller at 5,400. Just a little bit too cheap, especially if you buy the narrative that Trufant will be locking down Robinson, and then Ted Ginn provides a deep threat, leaving some passing underneath for Miller.
Yeah, and keep an eye on those percent rostered numbers that show up in all of our tools over at Footballguys. Devin's putting those numbers together for us this year, and they'll help sort of guide your picks a little bit. We've got a new single lineup builder this year, which is sort of our replacement for the interactive value charts. It works great on mobile. It's sort of like a simplified version of our bigger lineup builder that allows you to sort of quickly and easily do one lineup at a time on your phone. And then we've always got our DFS multi-lineup optimizer, which is where you can kind of see the rostership percentages alongside of our projections and values over at footballguys.com/DFS. Let's talk about tight ends. Phil, I'm going to come to you first on tight ends. We've mentioned a couple of guys along the way. Who feels safe this week? Who doesn't? I think you mentioned George Kittle a little bit with that Garoppolo pick. That sounds like a guy you like.
Yeah, 100%. And it has a lot to do with how Arizona just absolutely laid down for every single tight end that they faced last year. They did get a little bit better, through the draft at linebacker and safety, but I just see Kittle as someone that the targets are going to get funneled to this week. He should be pretty good for tournaments because I don't see too many people finding 7,200 to pay up for a tight end. On the same end, I think I mentioned Mark Andrews up high also, and he's not going to get the same attention as a lot of the other top tier guys, but the Browns are another one of those defenses. Like, when was the last time that they could cover tight ends? I mean, it's been years. So Mark Andrews, the only thing that he's ever needed is more snaps and more targets, and with Hayden Hurst, who I actually also don't hate, in Atlanta at 4,300. I think that Andrews is going to see the field a little bit more, and his floor and ceiling are going to get raised. And then I'm going to throw one absolute dart out there. This one is deep even for me. Because, again,
Devin's already smoking. He has no idea what you're going to say. And like
Devin's the guy that had Jeremy Sprinkle week last year. So before we get too carried away, let's just remember where we're coming from here.
Wasn't it Ricky Seals-Jones? But yeah.
Oh, that was the one that actually worked out.
Yeah. Who's your guy, Phil?
It's Robert Tonyan from Green Bay. So Jay Sternberger, everybody assumed, had the pass-catching tight end role locked up in Green Bay. The beat writers are saying that it's Tonyan. This guy is an impressive athlete. He runs like a 4.6 at 260, and he was a dominant small school player in college. If he is the one that's getting those snaps, we've actually seen him a couple of times in limited snaps catching 20-plus yard passes last year. And he's 2,500, and there's nothing else at 2,500 that is even roster worthy at all. So I think you could get away with playing him, and if he catches a touchdown, because he's a big, fast, athletic guy, and Aaron Rodgers is accurate in the red zone, it's going to take literally like 2 catches and a touchdown for him to smash value.
It feels like we've mentioned a lot of expensive guys on this episode because we're not finding as much easy salary relief. It feels like tight end might be an opportunity to take a chance and save some cash. Devin, is that what you're doing here, or is you got a different plan?
Yeah, 3 guys for me: Dallas Goedert, Hayden Hurst, and Hawkinson. So 3 guys all in the 43 to 4,100 range. I'm not going down to Chris Herndon or Ian Thomas. As a GPP play, I mean, you're kind of hoping, but as a cash game play, I think that Goddard, Hurst, and Hawkinson are significantly better than those 2. For me, it's Hayden Hurst. I want to see what he can do in this offense. I think that he's the guy that may get the most targets of the 3. I can make a case for Goddard. I can make a case for Hawkinson, but for me, it's Hayden Hurst in cash.
Nice, John. Who do you got?
I mean, as a general principle, this is a position where I'm likely going to spend down this week. Tight end is one of the more volatile positions. It's unpredictable. That's notwithstanding George Kittle, right? And potentially Mark Andrews. So not poo-pooing those guys. If you've got the money, you can definitely spend up on them, especially, percent rostered ownership, whatever we're calling it these days.
Percent rostered. We're going to try to stay away from the word ownership this year.
All right. Well, we'll try. I can't promise that I'll do it every time, but whatever.
We're going to make some mistakes, but we're going to switch. We're switching the lingo.
It's taking that into account. If they're low, then paying up to be contrarian, as Phil has already implied, that makes a lot of sense at the tight end position. This week, I think if you pick a tight end whose last name ends in H, you're doing okay. We've already heard about Hayden Hurst. I think that Herndon, even though Devin's not a big fan, at 3,300 for cash games, I don't hate that because I don't know how the Jets move the ball against Buffalo's secondary unless they do it on the inside. And he's 3,300, so he needs 10 fantasy points to meet value.
Herndon or Doyle?
I'm sorry?
Herndon or Doyle?
Well, I've got 2 names for my cash game list, and those are the 2 guys. So, yeah. But I was going with the H theme, which you just ruined by talking about Jack Doyle.
So what I heard is start O.J. Howard. Good. I'm going to put that on my list.
So Howard is on my GPP list because he's had a really nice fall in terms of connecting with Brady. We know that Brady has a history of making tight ends relevant. Hawkinson, I think we've already heard, and Hunter Henry with the injury to Mike Williams, I think becomes more relevant than ever. So go with H's. If you don't know anything else, remember that. Go with H's at the tight end position this week.
Nice. Any other tight ends, Devin, you want to call back to?
Yeah, Jack Doyle's interesting at 3,600 in cash. I think that if you can't get up to the Hurst level, Doyle is a fine replacement. We know what Rivers likes to do with his tight ends, and that's he can't throw the ball very far. Which is speaking of an H, don't play T.Y. Hilton, but yeah, I mean Doyle should easily have hit value. I shouldn't say easily, but he should hit value, cash game value this week.
And he's not fighting against Eric Ebron this year, which is a big plus.
Yeah. Let's talk about some defenses. Devin, maybe I'll pitch it to you first here. This might be a good spot to talk a little bit about the home field advantage situation without fans in the stands. How will this affect the way defenses play? How will we see more scoring? Like, will we see more offenses passing more often? What do you think is going to happen here? And then give us a couple defenses you like.
Yeah, I don't know. We've seen scoring up in the NBA, but part of that is they're not traveling. They have the same venue, and they're shooting from the same vantage point every week. Does that translate over to the NFL? I don't know. I can see two paths. I can see teams taking more of a boring approach because you don't have that fan pressure that, if you take the play clock down to 0 every time and just try and grind the game out. I could see that teams just taking that approach, but at the same time, you get calls in faster. You don't have the fan pressure, and you can make more adjustments on the line of scrimmage. So I can see it going that way too, where older quarterbacks such as Tom Brady or more experienced guys have the advantage because they can call things out more easily. So I think it tends to lean towards the latter, where it definitely the advantage is to the more experienced quarterbacks. But is scoring going to go up? I don't know. I think time will tell. And how we actually account for that, how we actually adjust for that, I don't know, because it could be where some teams see a boost in scoring because of established quarterbacks who know the system, who can read defenses, et cetera. Other teams may not impact at all.
Yeah. John, did you have any thoughts on this sort of home field situation?
I mean, I have thoughts. I don't know if they're going to be accurate or not, but it's a really interesting year in the sense that we don't have any preseason games. We don't have a whole lot of live practice, if you will, to really gauge how things are going to come together on the defensive side of the ball. But it's a truly interesting paradigm that we're up against this year. And so from my perspective, we've looked at the NBA and seen what they're done. And given the caveats that Devin has already mentioned, scoring is generally up. And as I think about, when home field advantage in a traditional context, it typically means a visiting team gets there and the crowd is going crazy and they can't hear and you're doing this. And that's all going to be gone this year. And one would think that home field advantage is largely gone or minimized. And so from my perspective, that gives a leg up to the visitors. And I think that we're going to see higher scoring games. And that's my general take. Where we're talking about DFS, what that means is I'm going to have a wider spread of defenses. And I'm going to be going up. I think this week, what I'm going to be doing is targeting what I perceive to be bad quarterbacks. I think the Eagles are interesting this week against Washington. Mm-hmm. I like the Lions going up against Trubisky, who I think is fighting for his job. I think that's also interesting. The Chargers, I think, have an elite defense, even though they lost Derwin James earlier this week or 2 weeks ago against Cincinnati and a rookie quarterback who I think is going to be good in this league, but maybe not in his first outing. So typically what I would say is build the rest of your lineup, and whatever you have left, go after the least expensive defense that you can.
Yeah.
Miami Dolphins.
Maybe not the Miami Dolphins.
I'm playing the Miami in cash.
Really?
Minimum price. They've completely rebuilt their secondary. Brought in Byron Jones. They get Xavier Howard back. Kyle Van Noy is coming in. They looked good in the second half, even with just a bunch of slappies, as Cecil likes to say, at the corner and safety position. So I mean, if you look at Byron Jones and Xavier Howard, it has the chance to be one of the best corner tandems in football. And at minimum price, why not? Cam Newton, who knows? I mean, it's them or Washington if I'm trying to go Lamar Jackson and Christian McCaffrey. I don't have any more dollars to spend on a defense.
If you're going to take a chance in cash, this is the position you take a chance.
In week 1 especially.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Phil, what are you doing at defense?
Devin mentioned Washington. I think they're interesting at 2K. They've got a strong front seven, and the Eagles' offensive line lost 2 starters during the preseason. So I could definitely get on board with them at the site minimum. My favorite defense of the week is the Colts. We already talked about how I think they're going to just boat race the Jaguars. They brought in DeForest Buckner, who is a game wrecker up front. I think that they're going to give Minshew all sorts of problems. He tends to hold on onto the ball too long and try to make a play, and we've seen it result in all sorts of fumbles and strip sacks and things of that nature. And I just don't see it going very well for them. I think there's going to be a lot of garbage time. Minshew's going to have to take a lot more chances than he would like to. And if that happens, it all benefits the Colts.
Devin, you didn't like the Colts pick?
I just think they're going to be really popular this week.
Oh, I gotcha. Yeah. Okay. All right, guys, let's move on to some stacks. We've mentioned a couple along the way, but I'm curious how you guys are sort of differentiating based on the roster percentages, finding some stacks that maybe are a little bit less owned. And Phil, why don't I come back around to you to talk about some stacks? Who do you like this week?
Sure. So I've given a couple out. I will be playing some Derek Carr stacks.
Right.
Definitely going to be using Garoppolo and Kittle.
Yep.
There's one more that I want to like a little bit more, and it's Josh Allen and either John Brown or Stephon Diggs. This is in tournaments. The back end of that Jets defense without Jamal Adams is like the equivalent of Carolina's front seven. So that's to say they're really, really, really bad, probably the worst in the league. John Brown burned them last year in week 1, and now the defense is going to be preoccupied with Stephon Diggs, an all-world receiver on the other end. And I think that Brown is the guy to target there because he's more familiar with Allen. He's got the better rapport. He's less expensive. And I don't think anybody's going to be on either of the Buffalo receivers. The only problem that I have with it and where I have some cognitive dissonance is who do you run it back with, and is Buffalo going to have to throw it enough to really make the stack pay off? So I think maybe I just talked myself out of it. The better answer might be to sprinkle in some John Brown and Stephon Diggs in your tournament lineups, because one of them could have a big game. Chances are they both won't, and that means Josh Allen won't either. But I think I'll definitely run it out there in a small percentage of lineups.
Did we just go full circle?
Yeah, I don't know. It's getting late, boys.
Now, and for full disclosure, Phil, you are a Jets fan, is that correct?
I am a long-suffering Jets fan, yeah.
Okay, just putting that out there. We kind of clarify everybody's potential biases on the show as well. Devin, who you stacking?
Gardner Minshew and DJ Chark. We talked Chark, DJ Chark, DJ Chark. I think that we talked about the game script where Jacksonville can't stop anybody, but Minshew has shown that he can move the ball, whether he's completing passes to which team, who knows, but they're going to keep trying to move the ball. And Chark is, we're talking about it stacked at 2% and 4%. So you get quite a bit of leverage there. Ryan Fitzpatrick is still interesting. I know he's facing New England, which has a relatively tough defense, but they're still missing some guys on that back end, and Kyle Van Noy is left, and Patrick Chung opted out, and some other players opted out as well. So at less than 1%, maybe take a shot with him and Preston Williams. And then
it's magic.
Yeah, I mean, he's a gunslinger. So, and then I'll take a shot with Carson Wentz and Djax is probably my favorite.
Yeah. John, who are you stacking?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, we do it every week, obviously. A few I like. I think Devin, I'll echo Fitzpatrick, excuse me, and Preston Williams. That's one that I have as my salary saver. 9,800 to get those guys on DraftKings really opens up things where you can do elsewhere. And as Devin pointed out earlier, Preston Williams is really doing some amazing things. But we tend to forget that because he got injured in like week 3 or week 4 last year. If you want to go on the high end, Lamar Jackson and Marquise Brown to go get away from what Phil talked about with Mark Andrews. I think Marquise Brown is going to be a lot better than he was last year. And that's not to say that he was bad. I just think another year of experience, we're going to see him kind of rise to the next level, much in the same vein that Phil brought up with Kenny Golladay for what it's worth. And then the last stack that I have on my list, Cam Newton, Julian Edelman. There's not a whole lot to go around in New England in terms of receivers this year. I know we talked about N'Keal Harry earlier, but who else is there? They released Mohamed Sanu, and beyond that, there's just not much to like. So I could see Cam Newton locking into Julian Edelman, and I think that he's the type of guy that could end with 12 to 15 receptions, and that's all you need to meet value for GPPs. But don't forget about game stacking, guys. If you're going to really try to win big-time GPPs, game stacking is where it's at. And I think I talked about it already, but that New Orleans-Tampa Bay game is certainly high on my list. I think you can even talk about maybe going after Seattle and Atlanta because both of those high-scoring game should be back and forth. I think the line is only about 1.5 at present. So maybe you get lucky, it goes into overtime, get some extra football for free, extra value. A lot of different ways to go this week. And I'll close by saying check my article, which should be live on Saturday. That's going to have my most complete and thorough thoughts with regards to where I land on tournaments after I get a better assessment of where the field's going to go with regards to percent rostered.
Nice. And here's where we move on to parting thoughts. It's our somewhat philosophical moment in our show, or a place for, where you forgot to mention a player and you want to squeeze in one last recommendation. Devin, where we're going to go with you to kick off parting thoughts. What do you think what are your week 1 parting thoughts?
Go all in week 1.
What? That's terrible advice. That's the worst. Watch one of our shows from another year and it's the opposite advice.
Yeah, no, just who knows week 1. I mean, it's have some fun, but don't blow your entire bankroll so that you can't play in week 2 if it doesn't go your way. And then Tyler Lockett and Russell Wilson is a stack that I forgot to mention, moving a little bit off of DK Metcalf, which is going to be popular.
Yeah, if you go over to footballguys.com/DFS, we have some articles about bankroll management. That might be a great way to start off your year. Phil, tell us about your parting thoughts.
Week 1 in tournaments is a week where you're going to get paid for having conviction on your takes. And by that, I mean, if you feel really strongly that Jonathan Taylor, for example, is going to take over that backfield in week 1, this is the week to trust your gut, because if you're right, you're going to get paid. And at the end of the day, that's what we're all after, right? So go with your gut, Nobody knows what's going to happen in week 1. That's part of the beauty of it. That's part of the fun of it. And that's pretty much it, is have conviction and don't be afraid to kind of put your money where your mouth is this week.
John Lee is a scientist. He knows exactly what's going to happen in week 1. So I want to hear what his parting thoughts are.
Yeah. You just set me up there. I was about to say I don't have anything for you. Look, I think week 1 is really interesting, particularly this year, because we don't have a data set at all by which to really guide us moving into the season. I would echo a couple of the things the guys have said and then maybe add a little bit more. Always be reasonable. 17 weeks, when you think about in the context of Major League Baseball, for example, on a typical year, you're looking at 162 games versus 17 games. So you think, well, I really got to move quickly in order to capitalize on what I know. But 17 weeks is a long time. It's 4+ months. So definitely use your head with regards to how you approach this week. I know DraftKings, our sponsor, is offering a couple guaranteed overlay contests. So definitely look into those. Get in there and max entry those contests. I think they're offering 10% over what the prize pool should be. And those are always going to be plus EV in terms of expected value. Where Phil is concerned, yeah, if you have strong convictions, absolutely do it. If you live in Indianapolis, for example, and you've heard some inside information about Jonathan Taylor taking the bulk of the goal line carries, or Jacksonville, something's happening down there, and you know that Chris Thompson's going to be out there on passing down situations, something, take advantage of it. But I would not go all in. That's the counterpoint to what Phil was bringing up. Be very, very careful with regards to taking a stance just because it's your gut feel versus what you have some evidence or data to support. Because you don't want to be on the outside looking to redeposit in week 2.
Don't cash out your 401k.
No, definitely don't cash out your 401k. And, we're going to run this show another 15 times this season. So we're going to give you plenty of ways to make money and above and beyond all. Thanks for coming back. I mean, year 5, right? Austin, that's what you said.
This is the 5th season, man. We appreciate all of the listeners, viewers, fans of the show, people who comment in the YouTube comments.
Haters.
The haters. We love the haters too. Thank you all for listening and allowing us to do this for 5 years going. So we got this episode early this week. We usually will deliver our episodes on Friday mornings. So we'll be back with our week 2 episode next Friday. On behalf of John Lee, Devin Knotts, and Phil Alexander, I'm Austin Lee saying thank you for watching and thanks for being a football guy. Be sure to check out all of our content over at footballguys.com/DFS by clicking the button in front of Devin's face. And if you'd like to subscribe to our YouTube channel, be sure to press the button that's on Phil's face. And if you want to see our latest video, click that giant box that's in front of John Lee's face. Check all that stuff out. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching.